Chapter 11 of Murder in the Maze by JJ Connington. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Squire's Theories. "We'll have another look at the maze, Squire, if you don't mind stopping there." Wendover nodded. He had expected the suggestion. "You didn't seem to overflow with sympathy for Shandon," he commented. "Friend Ernest raises my gorge," admitted Sir Clinton frankly. "Did you ever see a man in such a state? I never could stand that sort of thing." Then, as though he felt he had been too hard on Ernest, he added perfunctorily, "Of course he'd had rather a bad half-hour of it." "I admire the restraint of your language," said Wendover with a smile. "But you know, Clinton, I think you're a bit hard on the beggar. What could he do but run? I'd have run myself, and I make no bones about it either." "Oh, so would I," Sir Clinton conceded carelessly. "It wasn't the running that put my back up." "You mean that there's running and running, so to speak." "Exactly. Look at the case of that girl who was in the maze when the murders were done. Miss Forrest, I mean. She had just as much right as Ernest to get hysterical. I won't say she was as cool as a cucumber when we saw her. One couldn't expect that. But she kept her nerves in order. She didn't arrive at the house afterwards in a state of whimpering panic." "No, that's true," Wendover confirmed. "She's worth a dozen of Ernest Shandon at a pinch, that girl. She kept her head and did exactly what was wanted." "Quite so. She wasn't thinking of her own skin all the time like friend Ernest." "What's all this about Stennis?" Wendover demanded. "Is it merely some rot that Ernest squirted out in the middle of his funk, or is there anything in it?" "Here's the maze," Sir Clinton interrupted, cutting him short. "Suppose we postpone discussion till after dinner tonight, Squire. I don't want to be distracted for the next few minutes, if you don't mind." They entered the maze and made their way towards Helen's bower. Near the door into it, Wendover stopped suddenly and pointed to the pathway at their feet. "Hello, look, Clinton! There's a bit of black thread lying on the ground." They stooped over it and examined the fibre. Ordinary sewing silk off a reel, obviously, was all that Sir Clinton vouchsafed. Wendover thought he had seen more in the matter. "Don't you see what it is, Clinton? Ariadne's clue. It's a thread that the murderer must have been using to find his way out of the maze in a hurry. I showed you before that there's no difficulty in the maze if you've once been taken to the center." Wendover had his answer in readiness. "Yes, but suppose you were the murderer, you would have to get out in a hurry, wouldn't you? And you might lose your head. Anybody might get confused in the flurry. So he took the precaution of laying the thread to the exit, and all he had to do was to follow it and reel it up as he went. And this time a bit of it caught somewhere. See, this end's tangled in the hedge. And so broke off, and he had to leave it behind. When the Shandons were murdered, he probably managed to reel up the whole of it and so left no trace behind him." "Sounds plausible," Sir Clinton commented curtly. "We may as well collect the specimen, though really there's nothing distinctive about it. One bit of thread's very much like another." "Sherlock Holmes might have made more out of it than that," said Wendover, rather resentful at the way his discovery had been treated. "Doubtless, but as he isn't here, what can we do? Just bumble along to the best of our poor abilities. That's what I'm doing, Squire." They entered the tiny enclosure of Helen's bower, and Wendover's eye was at once caught by a sparkle from the grass near one of the chairs. He stepped across and picked up a silver cigar case. Sir Clinton held out his hand for it and glanced at the outside. "It's got a monogram, E.S., engraved on it," he said. "This is obviously friend Ernest's. You remember he said something about smoking a cigar here. He may have laid the case on his knee and jerked it off without noticing when he started on his marathon for safety." He held the case in his hand and seemed to give careful consideration to some point. At last he came to a decision and turned to Wendover. "I think we'll say nothing about this for a day or two, Squire. I may want to send this case up to London to have it examined, perhaps. I can't say yet. But in the meanwhile we'll not mention that we found it. Friend Ernest can take his cigars from the box in the meantime. That's no great hardship for him." "You think the murderer may have picked it up and you'll get his fingerprints from it? It's a nice smooth surface." Sir Clinton looked up from the case with a gleam of amusement on his features. "You're in charge of the speculation, surmise, and conjecture department of this firm, Squire. I'm only a humble clerk in the mum and dumb section, telegraph address, tongue-tied." Wendover accepted the tacit rebuke without protest. "Oh, have it your own way," he said. "I forgot I wasn't to expect anything from you." Sir Clinton wrapped the cigar case carefully in his handkerchief and stowed it in his pocket before doing anything further. "Now I think we'd better go and have a look at the loophole again," he suggested, "though I hardly think it's likely to have changed much since I saw it last. But I have a sort of feeling that Sherlock would have found something there, and perhaps you might be able to spot it, even if I can't. That's the worst of this detective business. One needs an eye for detail, and I never had it." With an air of deep solemnity, he led the way to the outer side of the hedge, approached the loophole, and peered into it for a time. "No," he admitted finally with a crestfallen air, "it seems just the same as it was when I saw it last." He put his hand into the hole. "Not even a bird's nest or any little thing of that kind," he announced disconsolately. We need Sherlock. We need Sherlock. He'd have found some cigar ash or something of that sort, no doubt. I can't see it. Have a look yourself, Squire." Rather irritated by the chaff, Wendover stooped and stared into the loophole. He had to confess, however, that he saw nothing in the slightest degree suggestive. "No broken twigs where the murderer rested his air gun?" Sir Clinton inquired. "Have a good look. The price is the same for 2 peeps as for 1. Special terms by the hour if you care to." Damn these spiders! That gossamer's all over the place. Filthy, filmy stuff." He rubbed his hand on the hedge while Wendover grinned at his annoyance. "Serves you right, Clinton. It'll take your mind off all this persiflage business." Sir Clinton seemed engrossed in removing the remaining filaments from his hand. "Pity Sherlock isn't here," he let fall in a regretful tone. "He turned into an entomologist of sorts when he retired. Perhaps he could tell us what earthly use spiders can be." "They keep down flies," said Wendover instructively. "So they do. Illuminating idea. I wish I'd thought of it myself. They keep down flies." "When you've quite finished being funny, perhaps you'll get on with your job, Clinton. You're supposed to be detecting murderers, not delivering lectures on insects." Sir Clinton dropped his jesting tone at once. "Quite right. We ought to be getting along to the police station now." "Aren't you going to do any more here?" "No." "What about bringing up that dog of yours and seeing if it can do anything?" "The dog could do nothing in this case," said Sir Clinton definitely. "It would be a mere waste of time." "Well, you seem to know your own mind about that," Wendover said rather wonderingly. "I suppose you know best, but I'd have thought it worth trying." Sir Clinton made no reply, but led the way through the maze to the car. "We'll call at the police station on the road home, Squire, if you'll run us round there. I'm expecting some more reports, and some men must come up here and search for anything left about, not that it really matters. By the way," he added casually, "I suppose you know who the murderer is by this time?" Wendover could only express astonishment at the question. "Well, you've had every chance," was all that Sir Clinton would vouchsafe. "If you know who he is, why don't you arrest him at once?" Wendover demanded. "There's a big gap between knowing a thing and proving it," said Sir Clinton cautiously. At the police station, the chief constable got out of the car and went in to interview his subordinates. In a minute or two he was back again, with some papers in his hands, and they drove on to the Grange. "I've just time to ring up Ardsley before going upstairs," he said when they arrived, and he disappeared in the direction of the telephone. Wendover noticed that this time Sir Clinton closed the door of the room behind him, instead of leaving it ajar as he had done on the previous occasions, so that no sound came out during the conversation. "I wonder what he's up to with that confounded Jack the Ripper," Wendover speculated uneasily as he went upstairs to dress. "Well, perhaps he'll tell me something after dinner." But when they had settled themselves in their easy-chairs after dinner, he found that Sir Clinton evidently intended to reverse the roles. "Now then, Squire, you're under no restraint of official secrecy. What do you make of the affair so far?" "I see. I'm to be Watson, and then you'll prove what an ass I am. I'm not over keen." Sir Clinton hastened to reassure him. "I'm not going to poke fun at you merely for the sake of making you uncomfortable, Squire. It would really be some help if I could see the thing from a fresh point of view. Lord knows I'm not infallible, and you may quite easily hit on something that'll put a new light on things and prevent me making a bad mistake." The obvious sincerity of this was enough to placate Wendover. He had been cogitating deeply over the Whistlefield affair, and he felt that if he could not suggest a provable solution of the mystery, at least he could bring a reasonable amount of criticism to bear on the available evidence. "What we have to account for," he began, "are, first, the murder of the two Shandons, second, the burglary, third, the attack on Ernest Shandon, and fourth, the so-called hanky-panky with the check." "That's correct," Sir Clinton agreed. "But suppose we leave out the check affair at present. We really know nothing definite about it yet." Wendover was dissatisfied with this ruling. "It seems to me an essential part in the scheme of things. Let me put the case as I see it. Hackleton is at the back of the whole affair, I take it, but he's been employing an agent, and that agent has been going beyond Hackleton's instructions and has been operating on his own to a certain extent. I think that fits everything in the case." Sir Clinton seemed inclined to dispute this conclusion, but he restrained himself and merely nodded to Wendover to continue. "I see your objection, I think," the squire went on. "You meant to say, why were both the Shandons murdered when it was only Neville's death that was essential to Hackleton? But there's quite a plausible explanation of that. You can't hang a man twice. So if a man decides to commit a single murder, he might as well commit two. The punishment's the same for a quantity. And if he can commit two with equal impunity, as in the maze, mightn't it occur to him that two murders would be a stiffer problem than one murder, in these particular circumstances? Isn't it the double murder that's giving all the difficulty? Of course it is. If either Shandon had been murdered solus, we'd know at once the line to look up. But at present we don't. Now why shouldn't the murderer have seen that very point and utilized it?" Sir Clinton nodded. "That's ingenious, Squire. I'm not ironical. I'd rather choose that solution than any of the other possible ones. If you reject it, you've got to assume that two independent murderers, both using the same out-of-the-way method, chose to operate simultaneously. The chances against that are miles too big. Or else you have to believe that two cooperating murderers were at work and that each of them thought he had the right victim in front of him. I can't quite swallow the notion that this was a cooperative affair. The third solution is that the murderer mistook one brother for the other, killed Roger first, and then had to kill Neville to carry out his instructions. He might have had only a general description of Neville Shandon to go on, and may have made a mistake in identity." "I doubt if Hackleton would have left any loophole of that sort," Sir Clinton interrupted. "Neville's portrait could easily have been bought and given to the murderer. But it's not worth while arguing the point. The murderer knew the two Shandons perfectly well by sight. I'm sure of my ground there." "You mean the murderer was a local man?" demanded Wendover. "How did you find that out?" "I'm not going to tell you at present, Squire. Sorry to play the mystery man and all that sort of stuff, but it has to be done." Wendover was plainly distrustful of this point. If it was a local affair, what was the black silk thread then? The thread we found in the maze not a couple of hours ago. Sir Clinton closed his eyes as though pondering deeply. "Yes, indeed," he said oracularly. "What was the silk thread?" He sat up suddenly and beamed at Wendover. "I should say it was a clue." "Damn your leg pulling," the squire broke out. "I shan't go on if you're going to make the whole thing into a farce." Sir Clinton apologized. "Sorry, you took the wrong meaning out of what I said. But don't let's waste time over it. Please go ahead, Squire." Only partly mollified, Wendover continued his analysis. "The next thing is the burglary. That was obviously a case of getting at some document belonging to Neville Shandon. You remember the fragment of notes for his cross-examination that was found in his hand? They've got some of his stuff, but clearly they suspected that he might have more notes. So they burgled his room to see if they could find anything further." This time Sir Clinton showed no desire to criticize. "Right. On the face of it, the burglar and the murder of Neville Shandon fit together. But the trouble is that the commission of the burglary would show that it was Neville they were after, and hence make the murder of Roger useless as a blind. I merely point out the snag. I'm not trying to carp, Squire." Wendover thought for a minute or more in silence. Then he produced a reply. "The two murders were part of a pre-devised scheme, as I suggested. But afterwards the murderer found he hadn't got the documents complete. He had to get them if possible, so he took the risk of the burglary giving the show away." Sir Clinton admitted the possibility of such a case. But now what about the attack on Ernest Shandon? How does that fit in? What's one murder more or less to a man who has two on his soul already? The attack on Ernest may have been an extra blind, simply like the murder of Roger Shandon. Suppose they'd got Ernest this afternoon. Wouldn't that have tangled the business up still further? Admitted, of course, and really friend Ernest would hardly have been missed. Is that all the theory you have on the point? Wendover was rather doubtful about putting forward his second choice. It might have been a practical joke, of course. Someone with a sense of humor rather out of gear might have had a grudge against the little beast, and knowing he was an arrant coward, they might have stirred him up without meaning to do him any real harm. Just used an ordinary airgun dart. He looked at Sir Clinton suspiciously. You yourself didn't waste much worry over him, it seemed to me. I thought at the time that you were taking it as a practical joke somehow. A very practical joke, Sir Clinton said, but he kept every tinge of expression out of his voice when he made the comment. Now we can go on to the identity of Hackleton's agent, Wendover resumed. You say it was someone who knew the Shandons by sight. It must have been someone who had leave to come and go at will through the Whistlefield grounds, or else someone who landed on the riverbank. That limits things down a good deal. Roger Shandon didn't encourage strangers to roam about his place. The gardeners had orders to turn out anyone who ventured in, unless they were going up to the house on business. No stranger or neighbor, bar Costock, was on the premises so far as is known. I came across one of the gardeners, and he told me that. Sir Clinton had no hesitation in confirming this. That agrees with all my men have been able to find out. Then, Wendover proceeded, we're limited down to the people at the house, the staff of the place, and Costock. Go on, Sir Clinton encouraged him. Wendover pulled a notebook from his pocket and consulted some figures which he had jotted down at the time he heard the original evidence. If you take the facts as we know them, he went on, it's clear that Neville Shandon could not have reached the maze before 3:37 p.m. And the second murder was over before 4:5 p.m. As a matter of fact, the times really allow less margin than that, for Neville's body was found at 3:52 p.m., and both were probably dead by that time. I think that's quite demonstrable on Torrance's evidence, Sir Clinton admitted. That means, then, that the murderer left the maze at some time not much earlier than 4 o'clock, since Miss Forrest heard him in the maze after Neville's body was found by Torrance at 3:52 p.m. Most probable on the face of it. Then if you find someone in such a position that they could not have been in the maze at 4 p.m., they're cleared. True. Wendover produced from a clipboard an ordnance survey map of the district. Let's take each person in turn and see if we can establish their positions during the afternoon. I can help you there, Sir Clinton volunteered. I got most of it in the police reports. They were busy on that very point. Wendover nodded and began without more ado. Sylvia Hawkhurst. She was out paying a call, wasn't she? Yes, Sir Clinton explained. She and friend Ernest went off in the car from the house at about 18 minutes past 3. At 3:45, just about the moment when the murders occurred, she was in a shop buying shoelaces. That precludes any chance of her having used the car to get back to the maze at the critical time. After that, she paid a call on some friends and stayed with them until she came back home after 6 o'clock. What about Ernest Shandon? Sir Clinton smiled. Miss Hawkhurst dropped him at the east gate as she passed out. It's about 2.5 miles to the east gate, and she says she was driving about 15 miles an hour. It's a narrow road, you remember. That means she dropped him at the east gate about 3:30. It's the best part of 2 miles back to the maze. Friend Ernest could hardly have walked it in 15 minutes, could he? And he's not much of a runner, to judge by his condition this morning. As a matter of fact, his story's completely confirmed by other evidence. My men interviewed the driver of the post cart. At 4:20 he came upon Ernest squatting by the roadside about a mile along the public road into which the east gate leads. It's a place where there's a little wood, easily identifiable. Friend Ernest was sitting there with his boot off, damning the nail that had hurt him. Wendover looked at his map. That clears him. I can see the wood. It's the only one that abuts on the road in that stretch. Now what about Arthur? We've only his own word for his movements. He certainly set out for the spinney, but that's all one can say. Wendover scanned his map once more. The spinney's only a mile from the maze in a direct line. He might have cut across and got away again, and no one would be any wiser. He had all the afternoon for the affair." His face clouded. "Somehow I don't think he was responsible, Clinton." Sir Clinton made no direct reply. "He was hardly a likely agent for Hackleton to fix on, at any rate," he observed. "Well, let's get on. What about the gardeners?" "Two of them were working in a field about a mile from the maze all afternoon. Each clears the other." "And the third gardener who was on the spot that day, the man Skeen?" "His story is that he was working in the kitchen garden near the house. There's no evidence against that." "The maids and the chauffeur?" "All accounted for. They had nothing to do with the affair." "And Stennis?" Wendover looked keenly at Sir Clinton as he brought out the secretary's name, but the chief constable showed no sign of special interest. "Stennis?" he repeated. "Stennis was undoubtedly at the house at 20 to 5 or thereabouts, for Miss Forrest saw him when she came back." "Then he'd plenty of time to be down at the maze at the critical period and get home to the house again, while Torrance and Miss Forrest were wandering about in the labyrinth?" "He had," Sir Clinton agreed gravely. "He'd have been the ideal agent for Hackleton," Wendover pursued. "And if Ernest's not got the wind up about nothing, which is always possible, of course, Stennis would be worth watching." "He is being watched," Sir Clinton assured him, and then seemed to regret his confidence. Wendover, however, seized on the point at once. "Ah, so after all your criticisms, it seems you believe in my original theory." "I've forgotten which that was by this time," Sir Clinton admitted. "What was it?" The squire was rather nettled. "You poured scorn on it at the time. What I said was this. Suppose Hackleton hired a man to put Neville Shandon out of the way. You say that was a local man, according to some evidence which you haven't divulged to me. Very good. If he was a local man, he might have had access to Roger Shandon's private papers, his checkbook, and so forth. When he was hired for the Neville Shandon business, he may have decided to make a bit extra by forgery, and cover it up by the second murder. 2 murders are as cheap as 1 when it comes to pay for them, and Roger's murder has confused the trail very considerably. It's only a question of identifying the man who could have managed all that without going too much out of his way and attracting attention." Sir Clinton had been listening carefully to Wendover's exposition. "That's very neat indeed," he conceded. "It would certainly hold water if it fitted all the facts you know, Squire, but unfortunately it leaves out of account the most interesting fact of all." "And that is?" Wendover demanded with some asperity. He was annoyed to find that he had overlooked something. "That is the most interesting fact of all," Sir Clinton assured him blandly. Then, with a change of tone, "And that's all I'm able to say just now, Squire. I've no fault to find with your reasoning. It hangs together beautifully. But sometimes the human mind, if you follow me, is apt to assume connections where no such things exist in nature. We've got an instinctive craving to trace associations between sets of phenomena, and at times we kid ourselves that there is some relationship when really it's only a case of simultaneity." "You've been reading one of these shilling manuals lately," said Wendover suspiciously. "How to be a philosopher in 10 minutes, or something like that. All this gay talk about simultaneity and phenomena and association comes straight from there. You can't deceive me with a veneer of learning." "Well, I won't dazzle you with further extracts. Let's get back to business. Go on with your list." "Young Torrance," Wendover continued. "He's a possible agent. I don't know about his financial circumstances. He may be hard up for all I know, and amenable to the cash bait that Hackleton could offer. It would be a pretty big one. Young Torrance was the person who proposed that game in the maze to Miss Forrest. That would give him a reasonable excuse for being in the maze at that particular time, and further, it would ensure that he was free from the girl's supervision at the critical moment. Could you have invented a neater dodge yourself if you'd been set to it?" "No," Sir Clinton admitted frankly. "I doubt if I could." "Take another point." Wendover pursued his line of reasoning with increased interest. "What evidence have we that there ever was a third individual in the maze at all? Torrance's statements. But if Torrance was the murderer himself, of course he'd insist that a third person was present. Miss Forrest's story of someone running in the maze. But that may have been Torrance himself. You remember that she found it most difficult to tell the direction from which sounds came when she was in the maze. That's a theory that might take some upsetting, Squire, if you can explain just one point. What did Torrance do with his airgun after he finished with it? No airgun was found in the maze after the business. The murderer got rid of it somehow. I see no great difficulty there, Wendover pointed out at once. Look at the time Miss Forrest spent in wandering up and down in the maze, unable to find her way out. If Torrance knew the labyrinth, he could easily make his way through it, get out to the river bank, chuck his gun into the water, and sprint back again into the maze before she noticed his absence. He thought for a moment before adding, In fact, I don't see why he mayn't have got rid of the gun in the interval between the last murder and the moment he gave the alarm, the time when he shouted out that he'd found the body. He paused again, then a further flash of insight threw a fresh light on the case. Why, of course, that would account for the running man. He would be rushing to the river bank and back again as quick as he could go, for the essential thing would be to get rid of the gun before anyone met him in the maze. Sir Clinton had dropped all his air of superior criticism. That's remarkably neat, Squire. I shouldn't be surprised if it doesn't touch the root of the business, at 1 or 2 points at the least. Curiously enough, the Chief Constable's comment produced a complete change in Wendover's mental outlook. He had fallen upon the Whistlefield case with all the enthusiasm of the irresponsible amateur. The mystery of it had caught his imagination, and he had thrown himself into the chase for a solution with an eagerness which he had hardly realized himself. He felt no more responsibility than if he had been attempting to follow clues in a detective story. Even the characters involved in the affair failed to give him any particular emotional background. He had never been intimate with the Shandon group, and some of the party he had not so much as seen before the tragedy occurred. Consequently, though he had used the real names of the various people concerned in the affair, they had borne no more significance than if he had said Mr. X or Mr. Y. The atmosphere in which he had worked had been that of a chess problem rather than an affair in real life. And now, at Sir Clinton's change of attitude, he caught a glimpse of a fresh side. It seemed that the line of thought which he had suggested might lead to something definite. It was no longer a case of idle speculation about the criminality of Mr. X or the guilt of Mr. Y. Instead, it was a question whether that rather decent young fellow Howard Torrance was going to find his neck in a noose one of these fine mornings. His own speculations might be the starting point for a fresh line of detection. It came upon him with something of oppression that in his position with regard to Sir Clinton, his speculations might be put to practical use. Situated as he was, it was hardly so irresponsible a position as he had supposed. But at this point in his train of thought a fresh idea occurred to him. Clinton said he knew who the murderer is, so my speculations don't matter much. But it would have been a bad business if I turned suspicion on young Torrance. He might have had a lot of difficulty in clearing himself if Clinton had taken up that line. Sir Clinton broke in at this moment. You don't suspect Miss Forrest, I suppose? No. All the amusement had gone out of the game so far as Wendover was concerned, but Sir Clinton seemed to have no inkling of this, and pursued his way through the list. Then that leaves Costock, he pointed out. I don't think Costock did it, Wendover declared. He felt inclined to turn his criticism into the other camp now. What have you against Costock? Can you bring any evidence to show that he had curare in hand? Or that he had an air gun? Or even that he was in the maze at all at the time of the murders? If that's your line, said Sir Clinton with a non-committal gesture, we'll say no more about it. I'll look after Costock. Now there's one name left, Ardsley. You'd better leave Ardsley to me, Squire. You're far too apt to see red on that subject. You couldn't produce an unbiased view of him if you tried. Have you any evidence about his movements that afternoon? Wendover asked perfunctorily. Sir Clinton also seemed to have grown tired of the business. You'll find Ardsley's name pretty prominent in the Whistlefield business when it's all cleared up, I think. But I'm not prepared at present to say exactly what his part in the affair may turn out to be in the end. Wendover was only too glad to let the matter rest at this point. Irresponsible speculation is one thing. Speculation which may lead up to a death sentence is something quite different. Suppose his ingenious reasoning, he had to admit that some of it was ingenious, were to lead to a wrongful conviction. He hadn't quite seen it in that light before. It was all very well for Clinton to go in for theorizing. It was his job to find the criminal and convict him. but Wendover had begun to feel that it was hardly for an amateur to step in and take a hand. Why, already he had light-heartedly thrown out suspicions against several people, and obviously some, at least, of these suspicions must be baseless. He would keep out of the field in future, he resolved. But there was still one point in connection with the Whistlefield case which had given him a good deal of perplexity. It threw no suspicion on anyone. He decided to clear it up if possible. "There's one thing I've been thinking over," he began. "Why did you pretend you'd forgotten those darts on the museum mantelpiece when all the time you'd left them there deliberately? You acted the part pretty well, Clinton. You took me in completely at the first rush. I thought it was real vexation over a genuine mistake. But when I'd had time to think about it, I saw plainly enough that you'd done it on purpose. You're not the sort that makes silly mistakes of that kind." Sir Clinton came out of his reserve at once. "I'm not fooling now, Squire," he said gravely. "I'm absolutely serious. I've staked my main case on that affair. I'm not able to tell you how or why at present. But you mustn't breathe a word about it to a living soul, no matter what happens next." Wendover in that moment had a glimpse of a rarely displayed side of Sir Clinton's character. It convinced him without further argument. "Very good. Nobody will learn it from me." "You may find it pretty difficult to hold your tongue, Squire, but I trust you to do it. The temptation will probably be very strong before long. I'm hoping for the best, but I warn you that I'm expecting some pretty black work at Whistlefield before we're through with this business. I couldn't help seeing the funny side of Ernest Shandon's affair, but the next one may not have much fun about it. You can take my word for it, the tragedy's in the wings now, waiting for its cue. So no matter what happens, keep a tight grip on your tongue. You're the only one who could spot that I was acting then. Nobody at Whistlefield knows anything about me. They took me for a blundering idiot, and that's precisely what I wanted." End of chapter 11.